everyone. Welcome to episode 1 of Storytime with Esther. Today, I'm going to be reading the first chapter of my novel, Mintadoli, so I hope you enjoy. Chapter 1, New Life. It was the warm season. The sun rose above the mountains, glimmering in the far north, and falling upon the forest in its shining rays, bathing it within light. Through shadowy trails leading under the arches of trees stood a small house waiting underneath. Inside, a girl called Minty, with dark, messy hair covering her face, a solemn expression, and eyes of gray, stood by her open window in the blowing breeze which brought the new scent of blossoms. She stretched her arms in the morning sun, then began making journals and sketchbooks by hand. Later on in the light of evening, she planned to make candles. It gave her excitement whenever she poured in the wax, and in the dark of evening, to light the candles which glowed in her windowsills. She sat down, exhausted, in the afternoon. Phew! She sighed softly by the clear window. I wonder if anyone at all will be interested in buying any of my journals. I haven't had any interested customers in a long time. It was indeed hard to get customers where she lived. There was no easy way for them to contact her. No one noticed her very well, but she continued to work anyway, quietly, in the presence of her home deep within those woodlands. She loved where she lived. It was almost always quiet. Often she saw the deer outside her house within the gleaming sun rays which poured through the canopy of the forest, where branches stretched out, creating thickets. Many nights she heard frogs and crickets. They seemed to be her only company. The soft dark eyes of the deer peered through the tall, green grass, and Minty found herself staring at their quiet faces whenever she was outside in the forest light, picking herbs, mushrooms, and odds and ends within the bushes. And oftentimes when she tried to find springs where she could collect the best quality water, they quietly stood nearby. Sometimes she heard haunting melodies drifting through the evening from people living far off, holding festivals of gatherings. Songs of old were played and resonated with her. One melody she would listen to with the most awe was, "They'll sing unto you," and she would sing along to the lullaby in the dark of night with candles lit in her windows. I sing to you a lullaby of dreams, the stories of them singing unto thee. Shadows never cease to come this night, yet still the guardians lay their hands with light. The song drifted throughout the forest and wind. On this quiet afternoon in the month of May, Minty baked rosemary bread, prepared pumpkin soup, and brewed tea in the beautifully polished wood-walled kitchen. She breathed in the aroma while carrying them to her table and poured her tea into a mug. Laundry hung outside, swaying in the breeze, while she slowly sipped her tea. She stared at the windy scene, the fir trees and shrubs blowing sideways, as the golden and blue hues of the sky splashed the forest with color. Once dusk arrived, she stepped out her front door into the forest, walking upon a trail that led underneath the tall trees. Looking up beyond the curved branches, stone hills jutted up from the ground, reaching higher than she could see. A ray of vermilion light came down amongst the rock, as if lighting up a way to walk across. And so, she decided to climb the hill she could barely see and wrestled with the shrubbery to get to the base of it. There were crooked steps to walk on, though thankfully she had good balance and was able to walk upon the ridge slope. She climbed the hill until she reached the very top and looked over the edge. It was a cliff which overlooked a place called Golden Meadow. There she could see the bright sunset touching the peaks of mountains in the distance. The air smelled of wet meadow grass mixed with the aroma of flowers. As she watched the sunset, her eyes were beginning to feel dark and tired, and were near closing. Because she'd spent too much of her time doing and thinking things that made her exhausted, she couldn't help but feel that way. The prospect was quiet and still underneath the dark sky, slowly turning deep blue. The moon rose above it all, with its silvery white beams. Minty sat still on the rocky hill with a serious expression, looking into the moonlit scene. Now the mountains were but silhouettes in the frame of cobalt and white. After a while, she stood up and walked slowly back to the rocky slope into the woods. Wolves and owls were calling from all different directions in the dark of night. The trees gently swayed as she found her way back to reach her doorstep and walk into her little house. She breathed a sigh into her pillow as she fell asleep on her soft, warm bed, dreaming. They were pleasant dreams, but very much the same as she often had, and nothing too unusual. There was nothing but silence to wake up to the next morning. It was quiet and still outside, with rays of sunlight pouring into her house. But from the corner of her eye, she noticed a dove delivering a letter through her window. She sprang out of bed to see what it was from. "Thank you, little one," she said to the dove. What could this be? After it flew off, she opened the letter and found that it was an invitation from Golden Meadow, which was hosting a gathering the next evening. All morning she thought about it, pondering and wondering why they would bother to send it to her. Finally, she decided she would go, placed the letter near her wood stove, and made something to eat. She had grown far too hungry, spending all her time thinking too much. It was another quiet day of work, with the wind gently stirring outside. At dusk, she packed something to eat inside her satchel and hiked to her hill again. It was a glowing scene just like the eve before. She eventually reached the hill, sat down, and began eating her evening meal. She was very comfortable and felt as though she could listen to the silence as if it were sweet music. But as she was looking into the orange sky, she saw something peculiar in the air. "What is that?" she asked herself in a whisper. "It's coming this way." Only a few moments had passed before there came a huge, raven-like creature with eyes like glistens of water droplets. He swooped down like an aggressive thief and desperately tried to snatch her satchel. "What, an emerald twig? Get away!" she yelled, standing up again. Minty was frightened by its size and horrible, angry face. "Go away," she yelled again. "Go find something else to eat and leave me alone." The huge, dark bird was furious and swooped down and tried to swipe her satchel again. "I said go away," Minty screamed. "No!" screeched the bird. "How dare you? Get out of here, you idiot! What's wrong with you?" At that moment, he successfully grabbed Minty's satchel, took out the bread, and tossed the bag away. Down it went, falling from the cliff. Minty stared down, watching her satchel descend as her mouth was gaping and her eyes wide. The bird seemed to be out of his mind, drunk with anger. "That'll serve you right," he said. "Oh, no, you don't," Minty cried. "I said get the heck out of here, you horrid, dreadful creature." She wrenched the rest of her dinner from his claws and pushed him away so he lost his balance. "How dare you!" he screeched piercingly. "Get lost and don't ever come back. Do you honestly think that you can get away with something like this, stupid beast of a bird?" Her eyes were fierce and angry, and she clenched her teeth. "Fine then. All you humans are villains. You always have been." And with that he flew far over the meadow and into the sunlight, a cold expression upon his dark face, and was soon out of sight. "What's wrong with him?" Minty whispered to herself. She wasn't sure what to think. She felt so immensely confused by the bird's behavior, and her head filled with questions. This was too much for her fragile mind to handle. She left her hill and ran back through the woodlands to her house, the wind streaming hard in her face. She tossed and turned throughout the night time. At long last she awoke to see a sunny morning once again. She went about her daily routine as always, but her mind was very preoccupied with thoughts concerning last evening. She couldn't stop thinking about the bird, and felt rather tired from lack of sleep. She had forgotten about the gathering in Golden Meadow until the evening was closing in. "Should I go?" she asked herself. "Or should I just forget all about it? I wouldn't enjoy my company anyway. Then again, it might be a nice experience, but I don't know. After she argued with herself for nearly an hour, she finally decided to go, but she didn't know if it was the right decision or a big mistake. She was so afraid deep inside herself and felt as she'd never had before. But here she was, standing in front of the door, with each decision hanging heavily upon her shoulders and only one answer. So she turned the handle and stepped out. She walked up the slope to a rocky hill. The great glow of the sky was so intense that she could barely see where she was going, but she found a trail on the side which led safely down to the meadow. It was a beautiful relief to finally reach the bottom of the hill, and now she could feel the meadow grass beneath her feet instead of sharp stones and rocks of the hill. This was the first time she'd ever set foot in a meadow. She walked along the grass, the air smelling so sweet that she closed her eyes, drinking it in. She walked on, looking ahead, hoping she was going in the right direction, when she finally saw people gathered together. All at once there was a small feeling of excitement inside of her, and she hurried toward the party of people. The first person to greet her was an old man. "Oh!" he exclaimed with the sweetest old man voice. "Why, hello! I'm so filled with glee to see another guest. Oh, how charming! I'm so glad you have come. Are you from the woodlands? You must be. I can see it in your eyes. Oh, how magical a place the forest is." "Oh, yes, I am," said Minty. "Thanks for the invitation, though I must admit I know absolutely no one here." "Oh, you needn't worry about that, dearest. I am sorry you had to come all alone without seeing anyone you know, but that's just as wonderful, for you shall talk to new people indeed. What's your name, dearest?" "Minty Stardom. And what about you, sir?" "Oh, just call me Old Man Mr. Mirgrove. Now why don't you go and sit down, and I'll bring you some freshly made cider. Very well? Thank you, sir. I mean, Mr. Mirgrove." He brought her over to a bonfire where two boys sat drinking sweet cider. Minty sat down too, suddenly feeling tired from lack of sleep. Her eyes felt droopy, and she stared into the crackling fire. Before long, Mr. Mirgrove brought a full cup of cider over to Minty. "Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Mirgrove. You are indeed very welcome. I really hope you like it. Please enjoy yourself." He walked away into the crowds of people as they all talked and enjoyed the refreshments. There was laughter and singing all about her. There were soups, breads, pies, fruits, and lots of drinks. There were cakes with butter frosting, berries, cookies, and apple pies.